Welcome to the return of and the latest installment of the Run to Daylight podcast. I'm your host, Todd Burrows, and I decided to come back and do some shows on my own network. Where my shows on Sharp Fantasy are all best ball related, what I'll be doing here is mainly two things. First, I will be doing some live drafts and streaming them as we do one a month at Sharp, and it's something I really enjoy. The fans definitely seem to like it, so I'll be doing more of those. And secondly, as I'm doing tonight, I'm going to get back to doing deeper style interviews with people in and around the industry so you guys can get to know different people. Tonight, my guest is Matt Deutch of Bettor Sports Network. They just took over recently as the producing and social media content team at Sharp Football Network. And I had heard of Matt in the past. Matt had previously worked at WFAN in New York City, which, if my memory is correct, was the first all sports radio station and something I personally was obsessed with in the late 80s and early 90s. Matt later started Sirius Sports Fantasy for Sirius Satellite Radio, and we'll cover his history in depth, talk about his new project, Bettor Sports Network, and with a history like that for both myself and others in the industry, I'm hoping to get some, nuggets that might help us be better podcasters, better streamers. And Matt's already been very helpful to me with a couple suggestions. So since I am back to be doing things with Run to Daylight, I'm also back to telling you about my friends, and I do meet my friends over at the FFPC. I enjoy playing all sorts of types of fantasy football, and the FFPC has you covered. Whether it's high stakes best ball at 125 a pop, like I play, over 100 each year, or if you love season long and want to chase life-changing money, the FFPC is home to not one, but two $1 million grand prizes. Draft in the FFPC main event or in the Fantasy Pros Championship, manage your team, and chase down those seven-figure payouts. Or check out FFPC's Dynasty Leagues and a ton more. Dozens of leagues are going off every single day at myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. Now, let me bring in Matt. Matt, thank you so much for doing this. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you a little better and to find out about, WFAN was just such a landmark thing. Tell us a little bit about your history and how you ended up at FAN.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm always so excited to talk about the past and the broadcast industry and where fantasy sports and betting are going. Been a super sports radio junkie my whole life. I grew up listening to WFAN radio here in the New York City area. When it launched on July 1st, 1987, I was blown away with the idea that we would have a dedicated sports radio channel. It just didn't exist then. You had to get your sports on the all news service. You had to wait till
Arthur Russ Jr.
That's right. There was no place to be able to call in and talk about the sports we love. There was no way to listen to press conferences, listen to managers after the game, and WFAN really changed everything. On 1050 AM when it first launched and then moved to 660, really changed the whole sports media landscape. It was the first, it was the best, and of course, many sports radio stations followed. And if it wasn't for the success of WFAN, I mean, where would we be now? So much of what we do in sports radio was started right there by the people that put that together. And I grew up listening to it. It was always a dream of mine to work at WFAN. And after college, where I messed around a little bit with an internship and knew that I wanted to work in radio, my goal was to get to WFAN. And I started at a community radio station in Westchester County, New York, in New Rochelle, New York, WVOX and WRTN, and was able to learn all the skills of a broadcasting major at a powerful Syracuse University or broadcast school. I was able to learn all in the community radio format. I ran my own board. I did shows. I reported live when there was a sniper on the roof at New Rochelle High School. I did play-by-play of youth tackle football. I wrote, I covered events, I plunged the toilets, I swept the satellite dish when it got filled with snow. I mean, I literally did it all. And fantastic place to learn, a mom and pop local radio station to learn it all. And finally had an opportunity to do a tour at WFAN as a fan of all things, and got in there and was blown away and was so excited to be there. Sat down at the program director's office, Eric Spitz, and basically poured my heart out, saying I would do anything and wanted to get in. It would be my dream job. And a few weeks later, got a call and was brought in to work some newsroom shifts at WFAN, and sort of took it from there. Had a philosophy of refusing to be
amazing.
at work, and worked really hard. Did everything I could to kind of learn the business from nothing, and had some great people that taught me. Take a lot of notes. If you make a mistake, learn from it, be hungry, work hard. And I worked myself up through the ranks and eventually started producing shows at WFAN and running the New York Mets play-by-play and pushing the buttons when the Mets go to break and you hear that theme song and you play the commercials. So much fun to see what happens behind the scenes when you're a listener for so long. So really a dream to work at WFAN.
That's amazing. And you mentioned Syracuse. Again, from my history and listening to, I believe Ian Eagle started at Syracuse and then at WFAN. I mean, just how many guys was that kind of like the pipeline, Syracuse Broadcasting School and, to get a job maybe like you somewhere and then to try and break in at FAN? Was that something? It just, when you said that, it rang a bell for me. Was Syracuse kind of like a launching pad?
Well, I always wanted to be there, and we just didn't have the scratch when I was going to college. So I went to the University of Buffalo and kind of had to work my way around and work my way up through the industry without the new.
Oh, I thought you said you went to Syracuse.
No, I'm saying I learned everything that the kids at Syracuse University or Fordham University, which is a fantastic program, or the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, right? I learned it all in a community radio format, just getting my hands dirty and working my way up. I didn't have a broadcast school. I didn't have a broadcasting major even in college. So Syracuse is a terrific school, and certainly everybody that comes out of there that's had success, they work just as hard as me. And it's not like nobody's mailing it in this industry. If you're doing well, you're working your ass off. And, the people coming out of Syracuse have a big head start. But, I wasn't going to let that stop me, and kind of, try to learn it all with reality rather than, in college, where it would have been nice. But I went to the University of Buffalo. There was no radio broadcasting profession, no internships or anything there. So, that was why I mentioned that. And all the kids that come out of Syracuse that I've worked with over the years, really very well prepared. Parents out there, if you want to get your kids a head start, Syracuse Newhouse School is a good way to go.
Yeah, that is very, very interesting. Whatever you do in life, like I didn't wake up till I was 28 years old. I was a carpet layer. I worked in Manhattan. I was really bumming around. And then one day I had an epiphany that if I kept giving the same effort, I was going to get the same result. And that led me to and I was being in sales was that for me, right? And when I got my first rep job, I had gotten a job at Bloomingdale's. And, when that first door opened, I remember, it was, when you get that life-changing opportunity, there really is nothing like that. And, it's, even though we're similar industries, basically begging for an opportunity. And then once you get it, proving and making sure you belong. That's what you're saying, correct?
Absolutely. I come in with a refuse to be outworked mentality. You can't control a lot of things in this world. You can control your effort. You can make sure that you're working harder than everybody else. You can make sure you're putting in more time. You can make sure you're studying up, you're reading, you're listening, you're asking questions. And that's what it was all about for me. And I got the job at WFAN to produce. I was told it's a hit a home run every day position, and there's no days off at that place, the number one radio station in the number one market in the country. And, you have every minute's precious when we're producing radio. And, I took it seriously. I really, made it my life. I didn't have anything else going on, and really love radio. I love broadcasting. I love the creative production. I love working with talented people. I love the energy that callers bring. I love the lifeblood that callers bring. I love the idea that I could research something as a producer to challenge my host to say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know MLB attendance was actually rising. Or I didn't know that the Mets on Wednesdays, never win a game. And, to do that research and to create a show around it and to basically compete with all the other producers in the country that are covering the same stories and to figure out a way to unlock that guest. For every great story, there's a guest that really matches. And I worked in a situation where I had Mike and the Mad Dog in front of me, and they were always getting the guests like Bobby Valentine on Joe Torre and Brian Cashman. And I had to work a little bit harder. The guests weren't spoon fed to me. I had to go find the right guest, check out what happened in sports history, go behind the story, do some digging, do some research, the thrill of the chase, going down to Madison Square Garden, going down to Shea Stadium, then Yankee
The
Stadium.
Garden in the 90s was just electric.
Yeah, I mean, to be able to work that area and to see all the legendary reporters that are there, but to meet, I was in it for the team PR. I would go down there and meet the public relations staff of the teams, especially the road teams, and introduce myself in person. They only knew me from an email, and to really put a face behind my name and say, thank you for putting that guest on my show. It meant a lot to me. Or if they didn't give me the guest, I wanted to come down here and introduce myself and understand that we couldn't make the guest happen this time. The next time you come into town, can we do something? Here's who I am. Here's what I can do for you. And that personal handshake, that personal meeting of people really went a long way, because so many people do it on the phone or email or text, and we've really lost that interpersonal relationship. Todd, that it was powerful when I was able to go down and meet somebody, and even more powerful following up with a handwritten letter. I remember doing it, and I'm an old man, but email was out there and everybody was emailing, and I thought it was a really nice way for me to stand out by writing a pen and paper note to people that mattered to me and sending it in the mail, and it really meant something to the people that received it. So that trick is still alive, all you people out there. If you really want to differentiate yourself, of course, talking on the phone, meeting in person, trying to be as personal as you can. But that handwritten note, pull that out when you want to, and you'll get a good impact.
I love that. I think that is a fabulous suggestion. And again, even though what we did was so different from, as far as career paths, it's so similar to how I built my business, going that extra mile, making that extra handshake, not just so that you would get an order, but just so that they knew you were there for them, whether you got an order or not. Right.
That's absolutely true.
It's very hard for people to resist that kind of sincerity. And underneath it, we're ravenous wolves, and we're trying, we know what we need to get to be successful, but we're willing to put in the work. It just is so similar while being very, very different. I do want to talk about, you worked with Steve Summers for a long time. What was he like to work with? And more importantly, what do you think is the secret to his success, that he's been able to stay on top, maybe not the number 1A guy, but to stay so relevant in this industry for so long?
Well, Steve Summers was my idol growing up. I spent many nights listening to him overnight, talking about the Mets and then the Jets and the Giants, and really reveling in his brilliant genius, creative form. I mean, if you don't know Steve Summers well, he doesn't take himself very seriously. He's extremely funny. I was so impressed with his monologues when he opens the show and does, let's say, 10 minutes. And then I started working with him, and I saw how long it took him to prepare those monologues and the legal pads and page after page and writing. And he'll go on at 6:30, but he's starting that thing at 3:00, and it's taking him 3 hours to write it. And it sounds like it's coming off the top of his head.
Back then he was 10 to 2 though, right?
Well, I didn't work with him in the midday shift. Steve's done it all. He did overnights, then he did middays. I worked with him, and he was doing the 6:30 to midnight show. We came on before the Met game, came on after the Met game. Really fantastic person to work with. He was my idol, still is, and it was a hoot to be able to put myself in the producing chair with Steve. So when you work with really talented genius types, especially the host, they are very demanding. They are all very special people. They all need to be handled differently. Of course, there's a lot of ego there. There's a lot of talent there. And most of the time when a really talented person, doesn't have a good night, they don't take it very well. And it's hard to get them out of that mindset. Steve was so big on the timing of his show. And if you've ever listened to Steve's show, he would be throwing to highlights where the producer would have to have their finger on the button and getting ready to play that highlight. And if you were late on that highlight, then, it's almost all downhill from there, Todd. Like the rest of the show, there'd be a poopy face on him behind the scenes, and really difficult to be able to work in that environment. And some of the most creative, talented hosts chase producers left and right out of the room. And for me, I loved it. I loved the thrill of working with a creative genius and to try to match his creativity and to be able to bring the same effort. Another lesson that I would give to people, especially producers, is we're never going to let our hosts outwork us. I'm always going to outwork my host, and I've worked with some really talented hosts that put a lot of time into their shows, and that was my beginning mantra, is saying I'm going to at least match that. I'm going to come to this host is going to know that I mean business, and I'm going to challenge them, and I'm going to come up with 10 ideas for every show because I know they're going to knock them all down, but I'm going to get one past them. And that's what happened. I would start out pitching ideas to hosts, and they would say, no, let's do that tomorrow. And I was disappointed that I wasn't able to get any ideas into the show, and that I just started working harder and coming up with more and more. And every show I would come with 10 things, and I knew I'd get them to say yes to one of them. And Steve was no different, and he was really terrific to work with on the fly. Certainly a challenge later in life, hard for him to read the screen, so much radio, hard for him to hear in his headphones when we were talking to him. So, borderline not able to hear anything. So,
Wow.
Just a lot of fun in radio to kind of work around obstacles like that, right? You want to talk to your host, he can't really hear you. You want to chat something on the screen, he can't really see you. So all of producing is really working around obstacles and embracing relationships. And, those two things, no matter what your career path is, it's really all about that. How do you work around obstacles? When do you ask for help? What do you have to solve on your own? What's an easy solution? What's a dirty solution? And then obviously relationships, they mean so much. Doesn't matter who the person is, whether it's, an intern right up to a CEO, people you meet in the street, people that you don't even have any sort of agenda for other than trying to say hello and meeting them. It's amazing how these relationships come back later in life to help you if you've been good to people. And, I've kind of lived my career that way of, like I said, refusing to be outworked and harnessing all my relationships and trying to overcome obstacles, which you got to try to enjoy that. It's not easy when stuff's breaking all around you, but it's that kind of, how am I going to roll up my sleeves and get this done, right? It's show business. The show has to go on. And, some of the great moments are overcoming broken equipment, guests who don't call in, radio, weather in the area, sunspots that are knocking out your broadcast. It could be anything, but, you have to enjoy those little things and enjoy the opportunity to kind of challenge yourself to overcome obstacles.
I want to get back to that in a second because I think that's fascinating. But before we leave Steve Summers, what always impressed me about him was his tone and his pace, right?
Yeah,
amazing. To me, that's what separated him from the average guy. It's so easy to see what's popular, and so many guys become carbon copies of what's popular rather than being themselves. And I whenever I think of Steve Summers, I think of his tone, his pace, his ability to draw you in, and his ability to get something out of his guests that they weren't expecting to give. Would do you think that A, did I get that right? And B, how important is that to connect with your guests and to get them to bring out something that, to me, there's nothing better than when you interview than when someone goes, oh, that's a good question, right? Can you talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, as far as pace and delivery, amazing to see how Steve Summers should change his the way he speaks, and you can almost, you can hear him smiling in a tongue-in-cheek way through the radio without seeing
Absolutely.
his face. You know that he's toying with the audience when he had a New York Islander fan
Has
on the
him right
phone.
in the hand.
And you know that the Islander fans on the hook, and you know that Steve is going to throw to a New York Ranger highlight to make that Islander fan upset, and you can hear him toying with it, and he's slowing down his pace, and there's dramatic pauses, and you can hear the smile, and then then he immediately changes and says, "You don't want to hear this," and then here comes the Ranger goal, and all of a sudden there's energy out of nowhere with Steve, and he's laughing at you, laughing with you, and really drawing you in. Regarding guests, I think he has a style that would be almost, sort of simplistic and kind of almost backing into a question without realizing that he was asking it to try to catch somebody off guard, maybe. And trying to break the ice a lot also, instead of asking, a very hard hitting question, a very hard hitting interview, he would be toying around and having fun and trying to slip things in there.
But getting there anyway.
Getting there anyway, and not asking it in a
there.
traditional way, asking it in an untraditional way. And all of a sudden the guest might say something, and there you go. We have something on the air that we didn't expect, and the guest didn't really see coming, but, kind of drawing you in a talking to your dad kind of way, and, just sort of having a conversation, not even realizing you're on the radio, and making someone feel really comfortable with your questions and your background, and kind of opening the door to draw the guest out. So we had a lot of fun with those interviews. Of course, in New York, it's tough. I mean, everybody's on there. Everyone's on edge. Everybody has to be careful with the media. So it was really hard to be able to get these players to relax and to have a good time with the interviews. But Steve was able to do that. I mean, the players in New York were listening. They knew his style. And, we didn't have a lot of time with, let's say, the starting pitcher of the New York Mets, but we had our 6 minutes, and we used the most of it, and we got some great content.
Yeah. So, all right, let's get back to producing, because I really feel like it's not something that the average, in other words, every host will say, and behind the board today is so-and-so, right? And, like you've already mentioned a couple of the things you do. You book the guests, you play the clips, you manage the host. What are maybe a couple other things that a producer does that the average person like myself might not know?
Well, there's so much to it, and the producers are, the heart and soul of any radio show, TV show, and it's tough in our industry because things have changed, and producers aren't valued as much as a broadcast industry. We're not paying our producers well. We're asking our producers to do a lot more behind the scenes that they did when I was producing. Let's face it, we had the internet and whatnot, but we didn't have social media when I was producing shows, and to be able to manage a show in real time, which would be preparing a show outline of all the topics that we're going to discuss on the show today, when we're going to discuss them. For our friends who have commercial breaks, we're monitoring our log with all of our commercials, whether we're pushing a button and airing pre-produced commercials, or our hosts are reading live commercials. We're making sure that those get in, because certainly if the bills don't get paid, they're not blaming the host, they're blaming the producer. So it's really on us to make sure that there's structure in the show, that we are doing all the business that we need to do, that we have the guests scheduled correctly, we have the right times that they call in, we have the phone numbers correct, we have their titles, we have their affiliations. We know if it's some writer, that we know what they wrote that day. We have their story in front of us. We're going to ask them about their story. There's a lot of preparation that goes into, let's say, a radio show, whether it comes, when are we going to take phone calls? How are we screening phone calls when somebody calls up to the studio? Bob in Miami here, I want to talk about the Dolphins. There's really a lot that goes into it. It's an art, right? The first thing I'm doing is making sure that caller's in a quiet location, making sure that caller's on a strong phone line, making sure I can hear them, they can hear me, understanding what their question's going to be, right? You got a lot of people out there that just want to hear their voice on the radio. You got prank callers out there. So take a lot of pride in trying to really whittle down the callers to figure out, okay, does this person really know what they're doing? Are they having fun with me, right? So I'm going to ask some questions, right? You want to talk about the Dolphins. Okay, who's your favorite player on the Dolphins? What'd you think of the game last night? Who's going to fill in for Tyreek Hill? You got to really ask those questions, because the fraud callers won't have the answers, but the sincere callers will. And there's also something to the callers waiting on hold, right? You're on hold for 40 minutes. You don't know when the host is going to you. So as a producer, we're picking up the phones. We say, okay, Bob, you'll be there in 2 minutes. Okay, Mike, you're next. Okay, Johnny, be on standby. He might go to you at any time. So we're making sure the callers are ready at all the times. Of course, we have our commercial breaks ready. We have our audio clips or our video clips ready. Now it's a very digital process. If you can imagine a computer screen with a big wall of buttons on it, and every button has a different sound bite on it. And some of them might be funny sound effects. Some of them might be music beds, music songs. Some of them might be, let's say, emergency content. If everything goes wrong, hit this button, and at least we have content on the air. Just so much to it. And you really, you have to put your time, and you got to understand the equipment. You got to know what every button on that control board does. You really have to have attention to detail here. It's not good enough to have your host who's a little too low or a little too high. It's got to be the right level. And, when you teach this and people look at you like, it was close enough, wasn't it? I listened to it. It was fine. Well, did you really listen to it? Did it really sound fine? Or was it really a little fuzzy? Or was it really a little low? Or was there something going on in the background that we could have fixed? And, you really have to have that attention to detail, and you got to love the details. You got to sweat the details. You got to understand that, it's not good enough if it's not, we strive for perfection. And, another lesson that I would say is, my expectations for myself are always higher than my bosses. They're always higher than my audiences. They're always higher than my hosts. I would hold myself to a higher level, so that even when I fall short of my own level, most of the time the people around me and my bosses and superiors were happy. So, you really need to strive for perfection. Of course, we can't get to perfection, but if you strive for perfection, you're going to land in a pretty good area.
That's amazing. So if you're doing a 4-hour shift, right? I mean, how many hours of prep are you doing for that 4-hour shift?
Well, when I'm working a night show, I mean, I would meet with my producers, let's say at 12 o'clock every day, or meet with my host. They would know 12 o'clock every day, call my producer. He's going to run down some ideas. We're going to talk about stories A, B, and C. We're going to figure out how that afternoon game went. If it's a win, we're going to do this. If it's a loss, we're going to do that. We're booking guests along the way. You want to be fluid. You want to be flexible with radio. You got to make time. If something breaks, if there's news in the middle of your show, I mean, your whole plan's out the window, and you have to be able to adapt to that. You have to understand that if topic A isn't hitting, we're moving to topic B right away. We're not trying to save this thing. Nobody cares. Nobody's into it. No one's calling in. The guests aren't into it. We're going to move. Conversely, if topic A takes over the whole show, we may never get to B, C, and D, because A is so good, and you have to give yourself that opportunity to stay with what's working. It's a lot like business, right? I mean, we do business, we start a new network like Bettor Sports Network, figure out what's working, and then pour lightning on it and fire on what's working. So how much prep work? It's basically, producing is a 24/7 job, Todd. It's not a job. It's not a career. It's a lifestyle. It's hard to be paid hourly as a producer, because we're thinking about the show all the time. If it's a morning show or watching the game the night before, we may not be on the clock, but how could I not have that game the night before affect my morning show? So I'm watching the games. I'm watching the post game. I'm getting up early. I'm reading the newspapers back in the day. Now I'm online. It's really a 24/7 gig. You're constantly chasing not just today's show, but tomorrow's show, the show after that. I've got a list of guests on my sheet that I'm chasing. Some of them I've been chasing for 2 or 3 years. Some of them, are writers that are more realistic to be able to get on day of. So it's constant. So when you say how much do you prepare for a 4-hour show, it's really the lifestyle of preparation. It's
Sounds
starting.
like, when are you not thinking about the show? When are you not working versus how often are you working?
It's that. It's, what am I using from the previous show to fuel this show, right? What did my host say that was right or was wrong? What did my callers say that I might want to bring back? What predictions were said at the beginning of the season? And now that they've happened, I need to go back and go pull that sound from September last year when we said something was going to happen. It either did or it didn't. So intense logging of the show, all the top moments, all the predictions, everything that you've covered really helps you as a producer to be able to have kind of a, sort of a mental Rolodex of all the sound that you could bring back, or video in a video world, of ways you can use past moments, past content to kind of fuel and go forward. So, I mean, if it sounds like a lot, it is. And that's why I say it's a lifestyle. You got to eat, sleep, and breathe the details and sweat the details and love the passion and love producing, which is very difficult because we're working really hard. We're in a very high-end environment. We are working with super talented people. There's so much on the line. There's lots of money on the line. We're not making a lot of money, huge expectations. And, a lot of people get out because they don't want to deal with that pressure. They don't want to deal with that expectation. They don't want to deal with the lack of money. When, everybody around you is making a lot of money, your hosts are making money, your salesmen are making money, the producers, we're not making a lot of money. And unfortunately, sometimes we're not being treated that well or valued that well. So it really is an art. It takes a special person to want to be a producer. It takes an even more special person to make it a successful career. And if you look at some people that have been producers their whole life, God, I mean, that is so impressive, and I miss it. I love the thrill of the chase. I love producing live content. Anytime I get a chance, I'm still able to do it. But it was hard to make it a lifestyle because of all the obstacles and the lack of money, associated with it.
Yeah, that is a brutal piece of reality. And, I wanted to find out more about that, and I certainly have. And I won't think of producers the same going forward. Obviously, the big stars at FAN were Imus and Mike and the Mad Dog. You have any good stories before we transition to your next stop for either one of that group?
Well, I was in the newsroom. I quickly went from weekend overnights to working with Steve Summers in the evenings to middays at WFAN, which was the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern shift. And I wasn't there that long because I had a lot of success. Was able to move on to Sirius XM. But the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern show with Joe Beningo and Jody McDonald and Sid Rosenberg followed the legendary Hall of Fame Imus in the morning show and led into the legendary Hall of Fame Mike and the Mad Dog show. So like when I say hit a home run every day, pressure, that was really difficult because Imus got his guests and Mike and the Mad Dog got their guests. And, now I'm sitting here like, okay, the general manager of the Jets has been on, the head coach of the Jets has been on. How am I going to advance this story and find another guest? With Don Imus, I did not know him very well. He didn't know me very well. He was obviously super successful and, well into his Hall of Fame career when I was there. There was one time where, and I was such a hustler all the time. I'm running around, I'm diving into research, papers left and right. And I'm running around WFAN and I turn the corner and there is Don Imus, like closer to me than he wanted to be. I mean, we were nose to nose and I was running and I stepped right up to him. And the first thing he did was put his hands down by his belt because he was carrying a gun. Don Imus was walking around with a gun. I swear when he saw me, his eyes lit up and he put his hand right down on his holster. And that was a moment that I'd never forget. I think I gave him a heart attack. With Mike and the Mad Dog, didn't get to work with them very closely. I was always in the newsroom when their show was I was on the studio when they would come in, and I was in the newsroom when their show was going on. So of course I would do anything I could to help the show. I was always very quick to be listening to the show and Mike's talking about something. I'm going to research that thing and I'm going to run it into the studio and be like, I got it. And then it got to be the point where they would come out of their studio and they would know I was there. And then they would say, hey, Maddie, go look this up for me. And it was really a lot of fun to be able to try to support that show. They brought me onto the air once. And it was a big joke because, again, I was so aggressive. I'm being told don't take no for an answer, right? You're in New York. You're asking for guests. Don't take no for an answer. So you tell someone like me that, I'm not going to take no for an answer. So it became pretty legendary that I was giving, PR for the Mets and the Yankees and the Jets and the Giants a hard time. I was calling every day. They would say, not today, Maddie. And then I would call the next day. And it got to be the point where, they would call the station and say, who is this producer that's calling us every day? It's a little much. So they brought me onto the air, and they were having fun with me, saying that, the team PR is running away. They're all calling WFAN. You have to be a little careful, Matt. It's okay to not get the guest. This isn't brain surgery.
Right.
And they were having fun with me. And that was a lot of fun for me to be able to be on in that environment. And, I was so young and trying to roll with it. But I remember that, it got to the point where, it was almost a negative on the air that day, where I was almost doing too much. And someone that I worked with at Sirius XM, Steve Cohen, who ran their whole department, he was at WFAN that day. And I remember Steve going to Mike and saying, what you did there was wrong. You clipped his wings. He's just trying to do the best job he could. And you're hurting him, and you're hurting his ability to be able to do his job. And that meant a lot to me, that Steve Cohen was willing to say that to Mike Francesa off the air in defense of me. And it was a lot of fun when it was on the air, but it did get a little hairy. And Steve stepped up for me, and I never forgot that.
Yeah, and I know that he was instrumental in bringing you over to Sirius XM. Let's transition over to that. How did that come about, and how did the idea happen to do Sirius Fantasy? Which is, let's face it, it's a different animal than what you were doing at FAN, which was more, who won the game that day, who lost the game that day, what's the hot story of the day. Fantasy is a subset of that. Tell us about the transition, how it all came about, and yeah.
Well, it was a crazy time. And of course, I was working my dream job. I was not making a lot of money. And it was the same thing every day at WFAN. It was Eddie Coleman, Mets reporter at 10:20. It was Sweeney Murdy, Yankees reporter at 11:20. It was Mets, Jets, Yankees, Knicks, Rangers every single day. There was no room for fantasy sports talk. There was no room for tech, movies, guy talk. I'm being told hit a home run every day, yet I'm working in the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern time. That nobody is in their cars, right? And back then, it was all about the cars. Everybody's in their office. Very difficult to get ratings in the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern slot when it's not drive time. I'm told I can't do fantasy. I can't talk about movies. I can't talk about girls. And there was really no creativity. It was hard for me to be creative over there. And I respect the formula that WFAN, the legendary signal, has. It's worked for them for a very long time. Back then, I needed to do more. I need to be able to paint on a blank canvas. I need to be able to create. I need to be able to try new things. And, so that's what Sirius XM came in. And the same Steve Cohen moved from WFAN to run the entire then Sirius sports department in New York City. And it was amazing to see that all the talented broadcasters from around the country in terrestrial radio, both hosts and producers and programmers, all ended up at Sirius XM, Sirius then and XM then pre-merger. And it was so much fun to get to meet and work with all the people that we've been competing against all those years. And it was really an amazing time for a new broadcast entity that was new and fresh and doing things differently. Of course, there was no tower. We were in space, and we were doing things that have never been done before. There were free pretzels in the cafeteria, which is a huge draw for me. And it was really that scrappy startup idea to be able to launch something special. And Steve ran that department, and he built out an amazing programming lineup. We had Sirius NFL radio and all sorts of niche channels that had never been done before. It was sports talk. It was local or national, but it was talking about who won the game, and it was all sports. And all of a sudden, Sirius then at the time, niche channels, only going to do NFL radio, only going to do NBA, only going to do college sports on here, only going to do MMA, only going to do soccer. So really changed the game. And also the live events, at the Super Bowl every year, at the Daytona 500, at the Final Four, to be able to travel the country and cover it live, really changed the game and changed sports radio forever. So in the midst of this is 2005, 2006. We have no fantasy sports channel. I mean, fantasy sports is well developed by now. In the mid 90s, when the internet came, fantasy sports took off, and yet there was no media outlet for fans that played fantasy. We would call in as fantasy players, and we would call our favorite sports talk stations, and we try to talk about who
They would
should I
have no
start.
idea.
They would not take your
They would
call.
have no idea.
They would not do it. They would not put you on the phone, on the radio to ask about who you should start in your fantasy football lineup at running back. There was a lot of reasons why. The programmers didn't think there were enough people that played fantasy. And more than anything, I think the hosts were intimidated. As fantasy players, we know all 53 players on the NFL roster. We know all 26 players on the MLB roster. And we know the minor leaguers. We know the college players. And let's face it, the hosts, I don't think they knew it that well. And I think they were very intimidated to be able to take fantasy calls. So with the rise of fantasy sports, and it's Sirius then on NFL radio, the guru John Hansen was doing a Friday night fantasy football show on NFL radio and getting more phone calls for his fantasy sports show than any other show in the entire Sirius XM. This is after we merged the entire programming department, and kind of used that model to go to Steve Cohen and say, Steve, look at the passion of these fantasy players on Sirius XM NFL Radio's fantasy football show. Steve is a longtime fantasy football player. He saw what I saw, and he's a Hall of Famer now in the fantasy industry. And Steve asked me to draw.
I just want to jump in. I mean, I was buying his product, Pro Football News and Injury Report, him and Adam Kaplan. I mean, I was buying that right around the turn of the century. So, Steve definitely understood where this was heading, I think. And you had fertile ground to plant the seed.
He knew it. He was one of the first to actually go in and find out the injuries of all the players and use that to help fantasy players set their lineup. So I knew he has had a passion for fantasy sports, and he asked me to draw up what a fantasy sports channel would sound like. Who would the host be? What would the format be? What would your sports updates sound like? What events would you go to? What topics would you cover? And I created a binder month by month, every topic, every, season, how we're going to do it. Where's fantasy football rank? Where's fantasy baseball rank? What are the hosts we're going to put on, our updates? We're not going to give scores, right? If someone on the Pittsburgh Pirates hits 3 home runs, but they lose 10-3, we're probably leading with that in our sports updates. Whereas in a regular sports update, that Pirate game's probably not even being mentioned. So I remember putting it together. It was a lot of fun. Steve got Mel Karmazin, the CEO, to say yes to Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio in 2009.
He was an entrepreneur. Wasn't Mel kind of an entrepreneur?
Well, I mean, he was an amazing sales, guru, if you will, working in legendary CBS sports stations. And, he drove the business for decades, and it was a visionary. I went to Sirius XM, not only because Steve Cohen was there, but because Mel Karmazin went to Sirius at the time. And when Mel did that, it meant a lot to me. And it sort of made it more legitimate for me to move there. And when Steve got Mel to say yes to Fantasy Sports Radio, and we launched in 2010, and I finally achieved one of my life dreams, was to be, the title of program director. For the first time, I was a program director at 2010, and had to build this channel with a remote staff. I was in New York at the former Sirius building. My entire staff was in Washington, D.C. at the former XM building, and kind of had to launch my new channel with people that I didn't know very well at all part-time producers, all working on my dream child, 5 hours away on the Amtrak. And it was a lot of fun going back and forth from New York to DC, finding out what we could do with a fantasy sports format. The first celebrity we hired was Maurice Jones-Drew. In 2010, Maurice was the number 3 overall pick in fantasy football. He was hosting his own radio show on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio, running with MJD. And the Jaguars didn't want Maurice doing the show. They were afraid he was going to give out the game plan. And this is another moment where if Maurice would have failed, it really would have set the industry back. And what Maurice did, really opening up fantasy football for players to be able to embrace it, that had never been done before. Maurice Jones-Drew took a knee on the 1-yard line and didn't score a touchdown to give his Jaguars the win. And on our radio show the next week, apologized to his fantasy football players and saying, all of you that had me in your lineup, I'm sorry I didn't score a touchdown for you because we needed to win the game. He was so brilliant. He had some rules. So rule number one was you always start Maurice Jones-Drew in your lineup. So anybody who called in, I'm not starting, Le'Veon Bell over Maurice Jones-Drew. I'm not starting Curtis Martin over Maurice Jones-Drew. You always start Maurice. Plus, rule number two, Maurice is never going to recommend a player that's the opponent of the Jaguars in a lineup. He's never going to say, start Steve Young because they're playing the Jaguars. So Maurice would draft his own quarterback, who was Mark Brunell or somebody else back then. He would draft all Jaguars when we would do a draft. He knew that if he drafted, let's say, the rival quarterback, of the Jaguars, that would be a big deal. Maybe the local media would play it up. Maybe the team would get upset. Maybe his teammates would get upset. So for all the fun we had with running with MJD, he was really brilliant that he was able to do it the right way and open the door for players to be able to embrace fantasy football. We went on to do shows with Fran Tarkington, with Roddy White, LaDainian Tomlinson, Zach Wild, Michael Rappaport, Lisa Ann, Kay Adams. All these amazing people that we had talking fantasy football on our Sirius XM shows. We had a table at the NFL draft in Radio City Music Hall that I remember this. Jordan Matthews from Vanderbilt, he was probably the number 25th pick in the first round. He sat down at our table on draft night in his suit and talked fantasy football with us on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. Had never been done before. We did live shows at the Super Bowl. We covered the Alice in Chains fantasy football draft with Jerry Cantrell and his rock and roll Hall of Fame buddies live on the radio. It was, with Jeff Garland and Duff McKagan and Scott Ian. It was a ton of fun. Looking back on all those days and years, just amazing to be able to create something, work with talented people, do something that's never been done before. We made a lot of mistakes. We had a lot of wins. We had a lot of losses. But that thrill to be able to be, painting on a blank canvas, working with talented people and kind of showing people, there is no end for what we can do with this, and I had a great run there. I was there for 11 years. I was at Sirius XM for 17 years and really, some of the most special moments of my career.
Yeah, that was great. We're getting kind of close to the end here. I definitely want to cover a little bit on what you're doing now. But I want to pick your brain a little bit. I think the people who are going to listen to this, there's two questions, and I'll start with this one, and then I'll get to the deeper one. It seems like hot takey, brash is what is popular, right? The Skip Baylessing of the world, right? And because that's what gets a reaction, right? And not everyone is as deeply into fantasy as the small group that I hang out with on Twitter is, right? And I think that my community doesn't understand that, there's way more of them than there are of us. But what is it that, you would look for when you were, deciding who to put into these roles? What characteristics were you looking for? And what are your thoughts on what I said about the whole, hot takey, brash thing? Because, some people are willing to do it. Other people, it's just not their thing.
Yeah, it's really taken over the sports media landscape. And, I think it's a negative myself. It's oftentimes negative content and not very positive and uplifting. I think you can say it's the lowest common denominator. You could say it's the easiest kind of content to produce. It's kind of say something outlandish and have people react to it. Doesn't mean it's not successful. Doesn't mean they don't work hard. It's not my kind of content. I kind of want to go beyond that. I want to have more fun. I want to be creative. But I understand it. I understand, we love sports because we're competitive. We have passion for it. And the best way to get reactions out of people is often, going negative or saying something outlandish to try to bring them out. And, I don't think that's going away. we try to really have, deeper conversations, deeper insights into the topics that we've covered. When I'm looking at hosts, I mean, certainly, you need knowledge, you need passion. I think you have to be a broadcaster. I mean, some of the great fantasy writers and sports betting writers aren't necessarily great hosts and great broadcasters. And that was very something I learned right away when we were building Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. There were no really fantasy broadcasters. Everyone was a writer. So we were putting writers on the radio and training them on how to host shows. And it's just not for everybody, right? I mean, not only is it nice to have a good voice and all, but you really have to be able to host a forum and to understand that when people are listening to you without seeing you, there's a responsibility there as a host to really, let's say, paint the picture. And to take a soundbite, let's say something that you're using audio from the Yankees manager. Well, you have to make sure that we're explaining what's being said there, and we're pulling out the pieces of what was just said, and making people understand why we're using this sound, why we're playing this. And there's something to be creating drama with a radio broadcast and changing your tone, like we talked about earlier with Steve Summers. So I think the ability to be entertaining is the most important thing, no matter what format you're covering. And I learned right away that growing up in New York, it's okay that if you're not a screaming New Yorker that talks with their hands and talks really fast, like there's other ways to do it. And when we built Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio, I was so proud, and now at Bettor Sports Network, the same thing. Proud to say we have hosts from all over the country, different dialects, different fan bases, different styles. Everybody does it differently. And I never want to make a host somebody they're not. For example, the RotoWire crew, I have great respect for, the legendary RotoWire brand. They're going to do their radio show a lot different than, let's say, John Hansen, the fantasy football guru. And it doesn't mean that RotoWire with their hardcore statistics and their numbers and their data is a better or a worse show than John Hansen, who's playing fart sound effects in the morning. Everybody can do it. There's a million different ways to connect with an audience, and there's a lot of different ways to be a terrific host. And I think more than anything, it's work ethic, it's knowledge, it's passion, the ability to entertain, and the ability to host a forum. It would be what I look for. But I think that definition has changed so much. And now in our day and age where everybody has access to a microphone, everybody has access to be heard, look at all the different ways that people are presenting content now. There's monotone spoken word that's doing better than flashy, dramatic language. And it's just amazing to me to see how consumption habits have changed, how styles have changed. And let's face it, what young people want is a lot different than what guys like me want.
Yeah. And understanding that. So let's talk a little bit about Bettor Sports Network. What is it? How did it start? And how is it evolving?
Well, I wanted to create a network based on sports betting and fantasy sports that was fun, inclusive, interactive. Being around the broadcast industry for a long time, we've seen a lot of changes. Technology has changed. When the pandemic came in 2020, we were all producing radio at home for the first time with our hosts at home, and everyone was remote. And with the amazing equipment from Zoom on down, we were able to produce radio outside the studio for the first time. And I saw the broadcast technology innovating, and I knew that it was possible to run a radio network or a streaming network without having to buy a tower, without having to buy a radio tower, which I always thought I'd have to do. At the same time, sports betting became legal and started to spread around the country. And I'm watching what's happening in 2018, 2019. And I see that the media is not really going all in on betting. I kind of theorized that the early media coverage would be very driven by money, would be very driven by stats, would be very straight and careful, which has proved true. There's not, in my opinion, there's not a lot of entertaining sports betting media. There's not a lot of interaction.
Give me the picks.
There's no phone calls, right? It's all picks. It's all how I could win you money. It's lowest common denominator stuff when we were in 2015 and we saw FanDuel and DraftKings, pushing DFS on us, it was very similar to that. It's, dollar and a dream and let's hook you. And frankly, a lot of the advertising wasn't very responsible and a lot of the marketing wasn't very responsible.
No, absolutely correct.
And the same thing is kind of happening with betting here, where the sports books will do almost anything to acquire you. And you have to be very careful as a consumer, because obviously gambling is a serious business. There's addiction, there's regulation and transparency that needs to come with it. But I knew that there would be room in this evolving space for interaction. There are no phone calls. The sports betting media, they don't want to talk to the fans. And I wanted to create something that was entertaining and fun, not about the money, but about fun. Any way you're engaging with sports is okay for me. You don't have to have $1,000 on the Knick game to enjoy the game. It's okay to bet 10 cents. It's okay to bet nothing and play for bragging rights. So taking that idea with the technology and the rise of sports betting to create Bettor Sports Network, I left Sirius XM on great terms on January 1st of 2020. Let them know that I wanted to start my own network and be a first-time entrepreneur and ultimately work with Sirius XM in a positive way. I was very lucky and be able to have people join me and help me build this network. We acquired an app. We built on top of it. We launched Bettor Sports Network in August of last year. We had 17 hours of live content every single day talking about fantasy sports and betting and sports collectibles, which is a huge business into itself. Innovative technology to have people be able to call in at one push of a button. No more dialing 800-888-6242. Just one push of a button. We have the technology here. Live chat, something as silly as live chat that just a lot of networks don't have. Twitch has it, the streamers have it, but big media hasn't really caught on to the innovation, and that was frustrating to me, that we weren't able to kind of have all the tools that one influencer can have on Twitch that a $1 billion company doesn't have. And I thought that was odd, and certainly with amazing technology and really smart people on our team, every time I dreamed something up, they said, yes, Matt, we could do that. Yes, Matt, we could do that. And we built Bettor Sports Network with that idea. We're going to take out the commercial breaks, right? Who's sitting through a 6-minute commercial break on sports talk radio anymore? You just can't do it. We took out scripted 60-second commercials that just are so inauthentic that, you're losing your audience. So really wanted to do something to give back to the industry, wanted to do something to challenge myself, obviously, wanted to do something so that I didn't have to be a cranky person in the corner by saying, well, if I had my own network, I'd do it like this. So late in life, I said, I got to go for this, and was very fortunate to have very talented, smart people join me, launched Bettor Sports Network in August of 2022. And now 11 months later, we have changed so much. Consumption habits in our industry have changed. Technology's changed. It's obviously, been a tough year with a lot of layoffs around media, and Amazon and Google and Facebook are letting people off. It only makes sense that it's going to trickle down to the sports and the broadcasting industry. So it's a challenging time for broadcasters. We have to be lean. We have to be smart. We have to embrace the idea that we're not just competing with each other as media companies. We're competing with every single person that has a smartphone that could be on the air. And that's a good thing. That makes content better. That makes us have to work harder. So that was the idea of Bettor Sports Network, to be more fun, to be more innovative, to be more interactive, to be inclusive and bring more people into the space. You don't have to bet $1 million to be able to have a seat at the table. I wanted to get back to the idea of giveaways on the radio, where we would be have an opportunity to win something at any moment with the push of a button. And we built that in an hour-long broadcast, someone's going to say Tom Brady's hometown. And when we say that hometown, the third person that pushes the fun button is going to win a prize. And we built it automatically, whereas you push that button and automatically you get a message that says you won. So to really take innovation, take what's worked from the past, borrow a little from the streamers, borrow a little from the top 40 DJs back in the day, and build something new. And I'm so proud of what we've done. But as a first-year entrepreneur, I mean, it is quite a roller coaster ride to try to navigate through this industry and all the changes, the innovative changes, the technology changes. and make money. I'm thrilled to still be in business. Nothing is guaranteed, but we work our ass off every day, and we're trying to figure it out. And ultimately, the market will tell us who we are. We have an app now. We're very big on gamification. Basically, you watch a game. We're asking you questions during the game on our Bettor Sports Network app, predictive questions. How many rebounds is LeBron going to have in the third quarter? Pops right up on your phone. You answer the question. We keep score. We keep standings. We give you a prize. So it's called BetterCast, and we're very big on gamification. So we do live talk shows on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and Twitch and the company website, bettorsports.com. Live interactive talk shows with some of the biggest names in the space. We have the Bettor Sports Network app, where we're asking predictive questions during games. We're producing short form content for the first time in my life. We're producing 40-second clips with almost the same amount of time that we would put into a 3-hour radio show, Todd. So we're into short form content. And now we're into business to business, where we work with the industry to produce content for them. We take our expertise, our relationships, and we try to help people who don't understand content as well, or are spending way too much money on it, to say, let us do your content for you. Let us produce your podcast. Let us produce your live events. Let us produce your song parodies or your fantasy drafts, and let us sweat all the details. You go run your business, and we want to be a business-to-business production services solution for the industry. So in just 11 months, we've gone from just having a live network to now doing business to business, having our gamification side of the business on the app, short form content, and just, who knows what's next.
So if I get this correct, excuse me, what you're saying to me is that you have an app, you have the ability to produce and take all this experience that we've spoken about for just over an hour, and that you're able to offer that to people like Sharp Football to help get their business to the next level. Is that correct?
That's what we want to do. I mean, we can even license our app and our gamification technology for other groups. We can go to the Boston Celtics and say, everybody that comes into the Garden is going to download the Boston Celtics app and play a free-to-play game, predictive questions while they're in the arena, and someone's going to win a Jaylen Brown signed jersey at the end of the game. Or we can do it at Buffalo Wild Wings, and you come into Buffalo Wild Wings, you download the app, and someone's going to have their French fries paid for them. So, we can build shows, we can build events, we can build song parodies. It's really what I've been doing my whole life, working with sponsors in a little bit of a different way. It's more of a behind the scenes, business to business way of working with everybody from the biggest of the big, from Amazon to DraftKings on down to small startups that don't have a big budget, that don't, have the ability to produce grand scale content. We can work with everybody and offer them a solution, offer them our expertise, work with their talent, help them grow. Some of it behind the scenes where you don't even know it's us doing it. Some of us co-branded as Bettor Sports Network. And it's been a lot of fun to get into people's businesses and game plans, find their pressure points, and to be able to help, more than anything, help our business, but also help them.
Awesome stuff. I couldn't wish you any more good things and success. Thank you so much for coming on my little show. And I've enjoyed working with you very much. I love the idea, and it sounds like you need one of you in sales going to all these teams, because I think that's a home run idea. I as someone who was in sales, and you have a feeling for it, I think the fans would love that. To be able to go to a game, you pay your ticket, you're going to watch the game, but you can also be involved in other ways. I think that's a home run idea. I hope it works out for you. Matt, thank you very much. Any last words before I let you go?
Well, I'd love your audience to join our community, sample our talk shows, join our talk shows, have fun calling in, be in the chat. You can find us on YouTube, Bettor Sports Network. On Twitter, we're at Bettor Network, and you can find our stuff on bettorsports.com and in the App Store, the Bettor Sports Network app. Support us, help us, and tell us what you like and what you don't like. We built this for the fans, and really nothing makes me happier than having a community of people that can talk about the games they love in a passionate way, in an inclusive way. So really appreciate the time and letting me spread my message. And it's been a hoot working with you, Todd. Look forward to more big things down the road.
Yep. Hopefully, my best ball bags will be packed and ready to land by the end of the year. Thank you, everyone who's followed this, who will watch it later on YouTube. I of course, picked exactly when the USA was playing the Netherlands in soccer in the World Cup. So I'm going to go do that. And we will talk to you next time. Thank you for watching.